Hey guys, Shadarek here with another feedback video, this time for Havoc Demon Hunter. I did already release my Devourer feedback video, which will be pinned down below and also in the description. So, let's get right into this. Now, the first thing that I have for feedback is going to be one of the most relentlessly brought up ones, and let's bring it up again. Cycle of Hatred. Cycle of Hatred still feels bad, making it half the value of what it did previously doesn't change it, still feeling bad. And one of the big problems I have with it is it says activating I beam reduces the cooldown of your next I beam by 2.5 seconds. It doesn't do that. In raid fights and in Mythic Plus, your next one is not reduced. It's still a 40-second cooldown. And this is something that I had specifically brought up before, but it just doesn't do what it says anymore. Because now, instead of going to that default 1 stack like it used to, where your first I beam would have a 37.5-second cooldown, or rather, sorry, a 35-second cooldown. Now it's a 27.5-second cooldown. It works out here where I already had the stack, but as soon as you pull a boss or start a Mythic Plus dungeon, you lose that stack. And that bug still wasn't fixed. So it just doesn't do what it says. It's not good. I just hate the whole thing. Making it half the power that it used to be to just not change it when it's something that widespread nobody likes, it's just weird. Just I do something with it, get rid of it. I don't know. You can make it a percent damage amp on I-beam. I'm not sure, but current design of it, I just get rid of it. Don't half measure say, yeah, this is bad, let's make it half as bad. If it's bad, get rid of it. Alright, next. Inner Demon feels weak compared to Chaotic Transformation. Specifically, now these are on a choice node. And I will say, I do love that these are on a choice node, and I don't want this to change. Because Chaotic Transformation and Inner Demon both do extend the length of the opener. If you only have one or the other, it actually shortens the length of the opener and makes it less specific. Specifically, Inner Demon, when you have Chaotic Transformation, you have two Inner Demons that you need to spend. One after your first I Beam, and one after pressing Meta. Before you press I Beam again. Without Chaotic Transformation, you only have to make sure that you press one before you press Meta. After that, you're going to get it naturally. Same thing when you're playing Chaotic Transformation, you no longer have to fit the Annihilation before Meta with your first I Beam, and you no longer have to fit another one after Meta before you I Beam again. So in both cases, we're dropping multiple globals out of the opener and shortening that opener that has been so long on Havoc for such a long time. So again, while I love this, I just don't particularly like the tuning. I-Beam does more than 5 times the damage of Inner Demon. My I-Beam currently listed as 27,000 damage, Inner Demon is 4,400, plus it resets Death Sweep. Um, so it kind of feels like a non-option. On top of that, because of the current cycle of hatred, it also means that you're skipping that 30-second I-Beam cooldown and resetting it, and starting with a 27.5. Cutting an extra 10 seconds off of what your I-Beam cooldown would be over an entire fight. So it's got some inherent value there when played with the current cycle of hatred, which you can't really fix. Again, get rid of cycle of hatred, that goes away. But yeah, it just feels a little bit weak in comparison. Not exactly a problem. I don't dislike the choice of one or the other, but I do know that it is widely thought that chaotic transformation is kind of the more problematic by design, and it might be better if Inner Demon's tuned a little better. But that one's minor. Let's get into some important stuff, though. So, Immolation Aura. Immolation Aura has a lot of issues. I've talked about it many times. If you aren't aware, there's a bug in the way that Immolation Aura is designed that it has 5 total spell IDs, and Consuming Fire can only access 4 of the 5 spell IDs, which means you can only have 5 up at once. So if I sit here spamming Immolation Aura, and I have 3, I meta, and now it's bugged. If I press I-Beam, it insta-cancels, and it'll recast an Immo Aura once an ID opens up. This happens pretty frequently for Felskard because it resets both Immolation Auras, and you have a 30% chance to refund a charge with a fire inside. This now will happen significantly more often and be even more of an issue because of Undying Embers, the new Felskar talent, which I do really like the talent, where you have a 25% chance for Immo Aura to reignite when it falls off, but that means you're very likely to have an extra Immolation Aura somewhere in that window causing this problem more frequently. So, first off, you got the problem of causing that bug to happen, which will cancel your eye beam. There's no way to know that it happens, and you can't even track your immolation auras as their own thing anymore. Second, Immora doesn't work with the in-game cooldown manager. Not properly, anyway. So, the cooldown manager, you can see I have Immolation Aura as a track buff. And when I press Immolation Aura, you'll see it pop up for a second until the spell ID changes. When you're using the initial spell ID, it pops up and it's gone. And same with the icon changes to show that there's an active cast. And now it's showing, and it only shows the one of them. Even though I have 3 Immolation Auras active, the first one's gone, you don't see it. That one's gone, now it's going to pop up the other one. But it actually recast and used that spell ID. We don't even see one expire in the middle there. We had a lot going on in the way of using weak auras to track when these were popping, just so you knew when your rage fires were popping, because if you're not in range of mobs for that, you lose more than half the damage of the actual Immolation Aura. Rage fire more than doubles the damage in AoE. You can also see that my Immora is spam refreshing here, just as an example of what exactly that Undying Embers can do. So, now we have no proper way to track it, and it's got all these bugs, and it's going to happen more frequently. So, something's got to give here. Either Immolation Aura needs to be recoded in a way that isn't so hacky and actually fucking works. That would be great. Or something. But with the way that the cooldown manager currently works, which I have large problems with in regards to buff tracking, everything else I think is perfectly fine, actually very good. But in regards to buff tracking, I'm very unhappy. Something's got to give here, where this is no longer an issue. I don't have a great example, but of what exactly to do, but it just feels like this cannot hit live as it is. So I hope to see changes there. Next, and this also goes directly right back into buffs not being trackable, Blur and Netherwalk cannot be tracked as buffs. That's crazy. That's absolute insanity to say out loud. Now, it's one thing on its own that you can't track your major defensive cooldown. If it was like Netherwalk was missing, I would understand a little bit more. But I can't track Blur at all. It's not an option. You even have Army into oneself, the 10% DR, and you have the Soul shield from Eldrachi as well. But our major defensive isn't in here. So when I press Blur, I don't know when the buff is active, except for on the button itself. Now, you can argue that's fine, and I don't fully disagree. That does work fine. Except for the way that Netherwalk now works is it's a 2.5 second passive, where for the first 2.5 seconds when you press Blur, you take 100% reduced damage. That's pretty damn important to know when that's up, and the only way to see it is on my full buffs up in the top right hand corner. There's way too many buffs at every given time. We have so much random bullshit on us. You know, if we got rid of things like WoW's Anniversary wasn't up here, and whatever the weekly is, plus my flight style, and this encapsulated Destiny from Dragonflight that is still on my character 2 expansions later, because I'm not going to go back and do whatever damn event this was for, my Vantis Rune, Cycle of Hatred, my Dusk Threat. You always have so many buffs in World of Warcraft that we can't actually just move the buff bar down and look at the buffs. There's too much. And then when you're in a raid situation, this, like 7 or 8 buffs at a time, that number can easily hit like 40 to 50. It doesn't even show up in the buff tracker properly. So we have no way to see Netherwalk. Very clearly this is something that should be fixed and like probably will be, but the way that the current buff tracking works, the fact that we have no freedom over it, it's only what Blizzard gives us, to me is a massive problem. And it feels very frustrating to know that we are at the whims of whether or not Blizzard fixes it. Same with Immolation Aura, same with when I press Blur here. I just have to hope Blizzard fixes it, and that's it. I no longer have the tools to deal with that myself. So I'm going to end my rant on that one and continue down. So, Blade Dance and Death Sweep. The damage to these abilities feels low, particularly the AoE component. The single target is strong, a little bit depending. Again, if you're playing Fellscarred, it feels significantly weaker because Burning Blades doesn't work on it, but it does feel a bit low. And it feels like a lot of the value is tied to different effects. So, automatic throw glaives through Screaming Brutality, Trail of Ruin, now proccing Glaive Tempest, as Eldrachi Reaver, proccing the Fury of the Eldrachi, and for Essence Break, proccing the flat damage amount per target now. All these different effects exist, and it's not the actual Blade Dance or Death Sweep damage, it just does a whole lot of shit. And that also goes into this, where when you Blade Dance, it's like, hey, here's a bunch of bullshit. And when you press Blade Dance, you just apply a bunch of debuffs. Now, it doesn't track all of them, but I can't get rid of these on my targeting frame. And you can see every time I Blade Dance, there's going to be 6 debuffs. And we're actually missing a 7th, which is Master of the Glaive. Depending on the target, I think it works on this one. So you can see Master of the Glaive, Serrated Glaive, Burning Wound, Trail of Ruin, Soul Scar. And then Burning Blades is also happening because of auto throw glaives. Anyway, there's just a lot of random stuff tied to throw glaive, and particularly I would enjoy if some of this was removed and the button itself was actually increased in power, so Blade Dance and Death Sweep itself felt relevant, especially in its AoE damage. To double down on this, the fact that it is our main Apex talent is 20% increased Blade Dance damage, and Eye-Beam refreshes Blade Dance's own cooldown. There are some weird parts to this where you don't get all the added benefits of those extra buttons on Blade Dance. In particular, with Glaive Tempest, you're not going to have the Fury to Blade Dance twice in a row and get a Glaive Tempest on each one. It's 140 Fury in cost if you do it back to back. Looking at Trail of Ruin, you're going to overwrite your own buff by casting it back to back. With the automatic Throw Glaives, Throw Glaive has a similar cooldown to Blade Dance, and every time you Eye-Beam, you're going to be using 2 charges. What ends up happening is you end up cycling on 0 charges, and then every time you're doing this double Blade Dance in the future, you don't actually throw any glaives on the second one. It does throw the 35% damage glaives, but it can't do the full throw glaive press that happens for free because you won't have a charge. So you're going to use more Blade Dances than you actually have throw glaives now by a significant amount, so you're going to lose all these extra throw glaives. You're going to be overwriting Trail of Ruin. You're not going to be able to get Glaive Tempest on all of this because the Fury economy is kind of fucked in a few different ways. So there's just a lot tied into this that doesn't necessarily play nice, and then the button still doesn't do good damage. I have a couple more thoughts that are going to touch on that, but let's move down to the next one first, which is Glaive Tempest. This Glaive Tempest version feels very awkward. It only works if you proc it on 4+ targets. So if you hit 3 targets with Blade Dance, nothing will happen. It takes 35 Fury about a second after the Blade Dance and drops it on the ground at your feet. So you need to actually have 35 Fury when Blade Dance ends, which hits very hard into our Fury economy, where you're going to very often not be pressing buttons because we lost Sigil of Flame as a Fury generator, and Fellblade no longer can reset its cooldown. As well as that, Fellblade was also nerfed from 40 Fury down to 15. This just means a lot of the time we're not going to have enough Fury to be constantly pressing buttons in AoE, which I know is not going to feel particularly good. And the answer to that is, okay, maybe don't run Glaive Tempest, but like, why change it to something that we can't necessarily use? I would like to see this possibly changed, like, per target hit with your Blade Dance, like the final slash of it, has a chance for your next Chaos Strike to drop a Glaive Tempest for free. So that could be something like 10% per target. So if you're just hitting a single target, it's only a 10% chance per Blade Dance that your next Chaos Strike will drop a Glaive Tempest. This also means that when you're playing around your Apex talent, where you get that Blade Dance reset, if you do proc a Glaive Tempest, it would be correct to not Blade Dance right away, actually use a Chaos Strike before you Blade Dance again so you don't overwrite that chance, and adding some more to the actual gameplay loop. Something like that I think would be more preferable than this current version. I'm just not a fan of how it currently works. Now, there's a lot more for me to get into. So, let's start banging through these a little bit quicker. Next is Burning Wounds. Burning Wounds is just Demon Blades, so on auto attack, or Throw Glaive, leave an open wound on your target, dealing the most minor of minor dots, and increases their damage taken by Immolation Aura by 40%. This is capped at 3 targets. And because of the fact that if you're running automatic Throw Glaives, these just go everywhere. The Burning Wound is constantly reset, and it ends up on two random targets, as well as the target that you're currently auto-attacking, because you're going to keep replacing one of the other ones. So you don't really have any reason to track this because it's constantly out, or you aren't playing Throw Glaive talents, and you have to actually have target to apply this through auto-attacks to multiple mobs, and really pay attention to this, or use Throw Glaive, which as a global is awful because you wouldn't be taking the Throw Glaive talents. In general, it just, no matter what, I feel like this adds nothing to the gameplay. It just feels really, really bad because it really makes you just want to play Throw Glaive talents when you have all your Immolation Aura talents in AoE so that you don't have to actually deal with this. Because using those globals on Throw Glaive isn't good. So I'm particularly not a fan of Burning Wound. It just doesn't do anything. It's just there. Um, Something that doesn't add anything and really incentivizes playing Throw Glaive talents for Felsguard when it wouldn't otherwise do so, just because then you don't have to use or interact with that mechanic. Next is debuffs. Now, I did just speak on this, but every time that we Blade Dance, we put a ton of debuffs out, and we no longer have the ability to blacklist this. This is something that Blizzard seems to decide what and when we track. So every time I press Blade Dance on these dummies, I now have a ton of debuffs overlapping that I just simply don't need to see. Again, if Burning Wound were removed, it would get rid of this. But like Serrated Glaive, I don't need to know because it's always up. Chaos Strike applies it. When you Blade Dance, it just shits out Throw Glaives, which also applies it. Same with Trail of Ruin, it's just damage. So I would like these to at least not be tracked, but the fact that we apply so many debuffs in general, and those are just the ones that they kept in the tracking, is a bit of a problem. If they hadn't automatically taken out hadn't automatically taken out Burning Blades, applying from Throw Glaive specifically, uh, Chaos Brand, and Master of the Glaive, that could have been 6 debuffs showing up instead of 3. That would have been a much larger problem. Now, that one's not like too big, but still something I'd like to see. Next, let's get into one of my biggest points and my biggest problems with the current design of Havoc on beta. Fury Generation just feels wrong. The way that they decided to nerf Fury Generation, and just to preface this, I think Fury needed to be nerfed pretty significantly as it has been. So what they did was Demon Blade's now baseline and not a talent that you run up here, which means you have an extra talent point, so you always have Critical Chaos or you always have Burning Hatred. No matter what, you always have both of these talents, whereas before you wouldn't necessarily have both, you'd usually have one. Um, and then Sigil of Flame was deleted, as well as Sigil of Spite for Eldrazi Reaver. So the soul generation from that is lost, and, that's 20 Fury per soul. And then Fellblade no longer gets its cooldown reset by Demon Blades, which, again, I don't particularly have an issue with. But Fellblade now generates 15 Fury instead of 40. I don't know why this was the way that they went around nerfing Fury. I think getting rid of Sigil of Flame is good. Sigil of Flame and Sigil of Spite gone, good. Demon Blades being baseline, I think is also good. Getting rid of the RNG procs on Fellblade, I also think is good. But why did they also reduce the one active component of Fury Generation that we have and cut that down so that everything is more RNG based? If anything, I feel like we should have leveraged more into a shorter Fellblade cooldown and more Fury Generation on it and reduce the Fury Generation elsewhere. So when I'm looking at it, specifically, souls still give 20 Fury. Every soul gives more Fury than Fellblade. And this is something that are just going on the ground. We can't properly track them. They pick up all the time automatically if you wiggle even slightly. This is probably what should have been the number one thing hit. I would like to see that souls, instead of generating 20 Fury, get cut down to 10. Specifically because Eldrazi Reaver spawns an incredibly high amount of souls compared to Felsguard. It's going to generate an extra one on every hunt, which is every minute, as well as a 20% chance per Chaos Strike to spawn one due to their new talent. And Wounded Quarry has a 10% chance per tick to spawn one as well. Plus, every time you use a Reaver's Glaive, it also gives another soul back after using your combo. The amount of souls that you generate over a fight or over a dungeon is incredibly high, and it turns into a massive amount of overcapping. Plus, when you press Fellblade, you pick up all the souls that are down, which is a max of 5. Even with this nerfed Fellblade, if you have 20 Fury and you press Fellblade and you pick up 5 souls, you generate 115 and you waste 15. I feel like souls are what should be getting hit, not the Fellblade itself. That said, if we want to hit this in multiple places but keep Fellblade good, that's something I'm not against either. I think it would be a good idea, period, to just drop souls. Whether it goes to 15 or 10, I think that should happen. I also think Immolation or a generation should be lowered. Whether or not that's tied to an effect on a fire inside or something that's lowered in general, I think it would be a good idea. Immolation Aura gives 60 Fury, 20 instantly on cast. So when I cast, I'll get 20, and then I'll get 4 per second. And when you use a ton of Immolation Auras back to back, like Fellsguard does, that creates some interesting amounts of Fury generation, where you just always go into massive amounts of overcapping. I don't think it would be a bad idea to reduce Burning Hatred from 40 Fury over 10 seconds to 30, and probably reduce Immolation Aura's Fury Gen on button press from either 20 down to 10 or 20 down to 15. But again, this would be with Fellblade going back up to 40 Fury, and I would like to also see a shorter cooldown on it. A 10-second baseline hasted cooldown, maybe drop that down to something like 8, so we have more active control over when to Fellblade and use this as a Fury generator. Whether this goes up to about 30 or up to 40, I just would like Fellblade to be what is actively giving us Fury, as opposed to all of our buttons that we're just pressing on cooldown also happen to give a ton of Fury and cause you to overcap at really weird windows. This goes into Blind Fury and Tactical Retreat as well. So with Blind Fury, whenever I I-beam, I'm going to be getting a ton of Fury back. You can see here, I'm at 80 when I press it. I-beam's going to drop me to 50. And after the cast, I'm up to 140. Plus currently it gives me a soul, but yeah, it generates you about 120 Fury. So because Fellsguard has such a high cap, it works well on Fellsguard, but you're going to overcap typically all the time on Eldrazi Reaver. Then we have Tactical Retreat, which you're using Vengeful Retreat every 20 seconds. It gives you 80 Fury over 10 seconds. This is up 50% of the time. Again, large amounts of overcapping. The numbers on these just feel way too high compared to our one active button giving 15. So I'd really like this to be shifted back around. Put a lot of the focus on active generation back into Fellblade. Take a lot of this passive Fury generation out specifically from Souls. Souls need to be hit number 1 because there's such an incredible amount of them, and there's no way to properly track these or deal with them in game anymore. So since we got hit on the UI aspects there, I think that should be nerfed. And considering if that would more heavily impact Eldrazi Reaver than it would Fellsguard, which it would, I also think Immolation Aura should be hit, which would more impact Fellsguard than it would Eldrazi Reaver, which is both more likely to run a fire inside, giving a lot more generation, as well as it has Undying Embers, so it'll just have more Immolation Auras and it recasts already. So, while that's a lot, there's one more thing. Critical Chaos. As I mentioned earlier, Critical Chaos is now a mandatory talent. So Chaos Strike has a 20% chance to refund you 20 Fury, plus 30% of your critical strike chance. Currently, I have a lot more than we're going to be having, because, again, I'm at max level 80 gear, but you can assume that we'll get to something around, like, 30% critical strike going into this first tier. That means this talent gives you 9% chance for 20 Fury per Chaos Strike, which is a hilariously low amount, averaging out to less than 2 Fury per Chaos Strike cast. I just think a little bit could be added to this if we want this to be part of critical strike chance is scaling up your Fury generation. This could either be increased. It used to be 50% of critical strike chance, now it's 30. Or alternatively, what I would like to see is Fellblade added to this, where if your Fellblade critical strikes, it generates double Fury. Just a nice added bonus to Fellblade, while also making it work with initiative in the ways of using Fellblade to get back from your Vengeful Retreat, which currently just feels like a downgrade in all situations, as Fellblade's not a button that you would want to buff with critical strike chance. This is something that could fix that and just kind of add some value there. But again, I just would like Fellblade to be more significant in our Fury generation rather than all of these passive sources that happen. Moving past the Fury section, let's get to the last few points. Shattered Destiny. Shattered Destiny is our Metamorphosis extension. It's now on a choice node with Collective Anguish. I'm actually not sure on the tuning of this, but that's irrelevant to the point that I'm going to make here. Shattered Destiny is actively bad to play as Fellsguard. Or rather, there is an active negative to playing it as Fellsguard. So, with Fellsguard, and this is the way that it works on live, if, and let me put a dummy down here just to show exactly what I mean. So, if I'm using my Demon Surges, I'll I-Beam, and I now have a Demon Surge on Blade Dance and on Chaos Strike. And then I'll meta, and I now have a Demon Surge on Chaos Strike, Blade Dance, Immolation Aura, and Abyssal Gaze. But pressing Abyssal Gaze does not give me Demon Surges again on Blade Dance and Chaos Strike. Which, you know, that might seem fine in and of itself, but when Cycle of Hatred is stacked, after the first time that you use this, I-Beam will come back up before Metamorphosis ends, and it will still not give you a Blade Dance or Chaos Strike Demon Surge. It will also not proc your Volatile Instinct, which is our new talent, which is like the previous tier set, where you get a Demon Surge immediately on entering Demon form. With Shattered Destiny, the spec that feels like it's supposed to incentivize playing around Metamorphosis in Fellsguard is actively bad, as you're going to be forcing yourself to be in meta and not get your Demon Surges more frequently. We also actually want to be in meta for Fellsguard now due to the talent changes, specifically Blind Focus, which gives you 10% more fire damage, which works on all of our chaos damage as well. In Metamorphosis is very strong talent, but we want to let Metamorphosis drop so we can actually get these Demon Surges. And in turn, you don't have buffed Metamorphosis reset abilities anymore, where being able to extend it makes I-Beam and Immolation Aura do 30% more damage. That's worse than getting the Demon Surges. So it's unintuitive, where you're specifically supposed to hold the button and let Metamorphosis drop with no real indicator that that is the case. And it's just, it feels like very poor design. So that's something I would love to see changed, where future I-Beams in that Metamorphosis window do give you your Demon Surges. And while the weird thing would be, okay, well, if you're playing Chaotic Transformation, then when you do your I-Beam meta and then you I-Beam again after, now you're getting 2 extra Demon Surges that you used to not get. That is true. However, in turn, we did already lose Sigil of Flame turning into Sigil of Doom, and we already lost that 1 Demon Surge there. So this is partially offset by the design changes anyway, and while the opener wouldn't necessarily be super intuitive, because you would at least want to get your Annihilation and Blade Dance out, you would be good to send your Abyssal Gaze after that with no loss and still get 2 Demon Surges back. It would be a lot of Demon Surges back to back, but I think it just makes more sense, and it would feel a lot better to play that way. Next is Burning Blades. So Burning Blades is what caused all the problems in the current patch on live, where Chaos Strike is a higher impact button during Immolation Aura than Blade Dance. This is unlikely to happen again, at least next season, but we're one specific tier set away from this being an issue again. And I think the design of Burning Blades should just change. So currently on live, when you press Immolation Aura, it buffs your Chaos Strike by 20%. That is enough to put Chaos Strike at a higher damage value than Blade Dance. That means that you do not press Blade Dance during Immolation Aura. So, this is, again, is unlikely to happen. In the first season, it won't, because Eternal Hunt buffs Blade Dance by 20%, and Blade Dance is buffed by 15% on our new tier set. So it's kind of going the other way, but the fact that the values are close enough that a tier set can push this, and with how frequently they love doing a 10% Chaos Strike buff every time Havoc needs a single target buff, Burning Blades cannot be putting Chaos Strike's efficient or multiplier coefficient as close as Blade Dance is. So I'd like to see Burning Blades nerfed down and Blade Dance added onto it, so it does about the same damage overall. It would do a little bit of AoE, however, the AoE portion of Blade Dance and Death Sweep simply is not a high number. And I can pull up what that looks like here in the combat log. Let me get rid of a very problematic talent that will fill my damage log here. but you'll be able to see the physical hits when I Blade Dance simply do not do damage when compared to the Chaos damage. So, if we're looking on 5 targets, the off targets are taking less than 1/6 the damage of what the main target is taking. And this is true for all the hits. 2869 versus 35 or 354 when it's all critical hits. It simply doesn't do good damage. So it's not gonna do much on terms of AoE, putting Burning Blades to work with Blade Dance. It'll be a small AoE buff, but it's mostly just so that Blade Dance and Death Sweep aren't decentivized and removed from the rotation because of Burning Blades, because whenever this does happen, it feels truly awful, and I would never like to see the state of Havoc as what happened in the 11.2 patch happen again. Down to the last couple points. Now, the next one is the hunt. So currently, the way that the hunt works is if you hunt, and then any mobs that you pass through will get your dot applied. That includes that you have a small bit of time to walk through mobs, so I can actually hunt and walk through. Ironically, that guy also just pressed it, so we see his. But with our Apex talent, hunt is coming from a 1.5-minute cooldown down to a minute. It's also going to do 30% more damage. And you can apply the effect to up to 2 additional enemies per point, which means instead of 4 additional enemies, it's going to be 8 additional enemies, totaling 9, because your target always gets this. This is a very hard effect to apply out, and I would appreciate if Hunt is changed to apply it in an AoE on cast as well, or at least, even if it just replaces the way that you currently apply and it only does it in an AoE, so that we can more consistently apply this out, I think that would feel a lot better, because this is an annoying thing to try to play around and remember every minute to make sure that you're actually passing through mobs. You're not really going to be able to get this on 9 targets at once, and the damage is going to be a lot more significant because it is getting buffed through Eternal Hunt. We're getting 50% more casts, and it does 30% more damage. So I'd love to see a change on that, but not the biggest of deals. Again, if it doesn't happen, just feels a little bit awkward. A lot of the value is going to come in from the double damage I-beam anyway. And lastly, we have a 3% movement speed node that was added. So, Fellbound. I don't know why this talent exists. That's really the whole point. So for Devour, this is Guile. That's the talent that makes Disrupt, Void Blade, and Consume Magic have a 20-yard increased range, which interestingly makes Consume Magic a 50-yard range for Devour, while their Interrupt goes up to 30. But then for Havoc, it's 3% move speed. We have Fell Rush gives you 10% right above it, which we're already not going to take. We also have Pursuit, which makes our Mastery increase our move speed, also a 1-pointer, and this is, at least with my current Mastery on beta, 8 times as strong. So it just seems like a really weird talent node. Even if you don't have Mastery, the Mastery move speed increase is bigger than Fellbound with no Mastery, because the baseline gives you more than that. So again, this just feels very weird that in talent where it was like a very important point for Devour was put here, and it is such a nothing talent for Havoc and Vengeance. It's not mandatory to go through, so it's kind of whatever, but I was just hoping for something of substance to be there. So yeah, that's about everything. My biggest issues really do hinge around the inability to track and play around Immolation Aura for Felsguard, and the fact that the Fury generation was taken out of Fellblade instead of taken out of what we can't control. Just some weird design choices in general. So let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. And that is about everything for this video. If you want to watch me live, you can always catch me at twitch.tv/Shotteric. And if you want to stay up to date with Havoc Demon Hunter, Devour, and just World of Warcraft in general, you can always follow my channel. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.